Welcome to Halitics on Tuesday, the 11th day of April. So let me give a quick happy birthday wish to my wonderful wife, Mindy. It's been well over 30 years now. I can't even get the 32, almost 33 years we've been married. And she has made me a very, very happy and very fortunate man indeed. So sometimes, and before I start getting into the program, and I know I'm a little bit pale and washed out, I'm going to have to deal with it. I'm going to put some real good shades up in my studio here because the natural light, the backlighting really screws up with the look. So I'm going to fix that. All these little details I'm working on, so we're going to get there. One thing I noticed, by the way, and I think I've been really, really pleased. Great call yesterday with David Cobb. Lots of viewers, lots of you check in. And don't forget, like and subscribe. The subscribe button's right there in the bottom right corner of the screen in front of you as you're watching this. And it can be either on your phone or your computer. Whatever you're watching, you will be able to see that like and subscribe button. Also, you can give your comments in real time. I will not necessarily see them. I will comment after the fact. I can't focus on every single thing at once. Maybe at some point we'll get a producer. Did want to, yeah. So sometimes, oh, and yeah, the timing. So one of the really nice things for me as a host is I don't have to start at exactly any particular time. I can move the start time around a little bit. Back in radio days, of course, it's appointment radio. You're on at a specific time. You have to be on. You have to hit your breaks. You don't have to do this. Gives us a little more freedom. Hopefully not too much freedom, but gives me enough time to make everything look hopefully good for you. Just a little look behind the scenes. And I know some folks don't like those look behind the scenes too bad. And give me a call. I do want to talk to you. I haven't only had a few calls since we started up. And part of the reason I do this live, because I could pre-record them and then put them up. And we're getting like I said, lots of people are watching. So it's not a function of nobody's seeing and listening to these videos. It's just a lot of you aren't calling in. Some of you aren't watching live, obviously. But the one of the reasons I do it live in the first place is to have the dialogue with you. The other reason, perhaps a little more selfish, is if I did pre-recordings, I'd have to really focus on editing, and that takes forever to edit these videos. So, it's just an inordinate amount of work to edit them after the fact. All right, 240-363-7190. Sometimes the headline is all you need to see. So I just saw this headline, was like, oh my gosh, wow, Bernie's outrageous wealth. Now, I am a Bernie Sanders fan. I think he's probably the best politician we have. And he's never been one to enrich himself at the public trough. It hasn't happened. He has not taken money from his connections. He simply hasn't. He hasn't used his wealth or his power, I should say, his influence as a U.S. Senator to enrich himself. Unlike so many politicians, tragically, like the Clintons, like the Obamas, who we saw just, fill their pockets. Obama with all those Wall Street speeches, albeit after he left office. But still, it's very, very worrisome because why then did groups like, was it the Carlyle Group, BlackRock, whatever? I think it was Carlyle, a big oil and gas company concern in New York. Why did they invite him for those super expensive speeches after he left office, if not possibly because he did big favors for the oil and gas industry? And he did. He made us the number one producer and exporter of natural gas. Obviously, we know the Clintons left office and Hillary's immortal words broke, and now they're worth probably around $200 million. Speeches to Goldman Sachs, the Clinton Global Initiative, Clinton Foundation, which took millions and millions from plutocrats around the world, also focusing heavily on allowing fracking. Obviously, this is very, very troubling for our democracy. It means decisions are being made by people with money who give it to our politicians, either while they're in office or after they leave office. And that means our voices are correspondingly muted. And it's I don't want to say it's Democrats, Republicans do exactly the same thing. The emoluments clause was violated on numerous occasions by Trump, taking foreign potentates' money by insisting that they stay at his hotels and spend cash at Trump resorts. So the whole thing's disgusting and despicable. It's across the board. It's a swamp. That's one of the reasons I think Trump was elected in the first place. He said he would drain the swamp. Bernie, is he say it ain't so? Bernie, are you also one of those corrupt politicians? And this is from the California Examiner. I don't even know how this popped up. The untold truth behind his outrageous wealth. Well, that would be worrisome. We don't want him to be too rich. You see, he's throwing those wads of cash or those rubber bands of cash up in the air with a big smile on his face. But when you look at it, and I was sure this would be the case, to be perfectly honest with you, Bernie is far from outrageously wealthy. But there's a kernel, not really of truth to this story, but there's a rationale. I mean, as absurd as it may seem to us that this man who has hardly enriched himself at the public trough, and let's see if I can get this. Yes, there we go. So got to get the... get it so you can read it a little better. $3 million, hardly some massive amount of money for someone in Washington, in Congress. And we've seen, I was surprised, by the way, that the median wealth of senators is probably in that range, about 3.5 million. I would have thought it was much, much, much higher. But remember, this means half have more, half have less, not the average. The average is going to be probably 10, 12 million. I think I read that. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but it's skewed because you have people like Mark Warner, who may be worth $500 million, who is in Congress. You have many other very wealthy. Mitch McConnell, his wife Elaine Chao, are probably close to $50 million. There are many very, very wealthy U.S. senators. John Kerry, I guess John Kerry is no longer in Congress. He was one of the richest, of course, when he was in the U.S. Senate, with the Heinz fortune behind him. But there are a number of others, some names that I wasn't even very familiar with, who are very, very wealthy. I think Liz Cheney's just got voted out. But Feinstein, very, very wealthy woman, probably north of $100 million there. So quite a number of very rich politicians. Bernie at $3 million is certainly not poor, but if you look closely at it, how did he get his money? He wrote books. Seems to me most of us think that if you sell, I certainly do, if you sell a book that you wrote, and his books are all about making America a better place, a fairer place. They're all about how can we, as Americans, get the kind of life that we all deserve, which means a decent minimum income. It means a tight safety net. So writing those books is hardly an example of Bernie taking advantage of his position to extract wealth from rich and powerful people for whom he will subsequently do favors, or for whom he has already done favors. In fact, it's just the opposite. He has never put himself first. And I give him a lot of credit for that. In the end, I look at what people do, their policies. But if you're corrupt, if you take money like Clarence Thomas, then you're not trustworthy. Then you're clearly not on our side. You take money from billionaires. And look, it's a symbiotic relationship. For all we know, Clarence Thomas smoking his fat cigars with the billionaire class, with hedge fund managers, with James Crow, I believe is the man's name. He may believe everything that he writes in his decisions that are so beloved by the plutocratic class. He may believe all that. He might have done it without getting all that money from Crow, but hey, he deserves a reward from the billionaire class, from the billionaire's vantage point either way. So if you see people taking money from rich and powerful people who are in government, there's two possibilities. They're either taking the money and they will return the favor in kind, or they simply have done much for rich and powerful people and they're being rewarded for it, even if it's not an outright bribe. Either way, it's obviously terribly, terribly wrong. And if you say, well, hey, if this is really what Clarence Thomas believes, then I guess it's okay, right? Because he would do it anyway. So the money's not impacting on him. Well, it's impacting on him in a lot of ways. It gives more money to his wife. She can spend it on conservative causes. She can use it to, and he can use it to help promote conservative justices, right-wing justices, promote himself. It's a very, very ugly, vicious circle. With politicians who are rewarded by getting money from the rich, even if they would do it anyway, like maybe Mitch McConnell is just as amoral, just as as sociopathic as his decisions suggest. And he would rule exactly the same way whether he were rewarded with millions of dollars in speaking fees. Maybe the same for Hillary Clinton. She really does believe that Goldman Sachs bankers should get to make all the decisions about our economy, not elected representatives. Maybe she really believes that. And she would come to the same decisions that she does when she was Secretary of State or when she was in Congress, when she was a U.S. Senator. Maybe that money didn't change her votes or her actions as Secretary of State, but it empowered her. It allowed her to stay in office, to run for re-election, to run for president. It gave her a tremendous boost over candidates who are on our side. So again, it's just simply wrong, and we've got to fight it. We've got to somehow get that money out of politics if we want to have a democracy. If we want to have a democracy. This is really the point. And I'm not going to spend too much more time, because let's see if I can get this. Why is my slide? There we go. So why though? So the question was why, and I posed this earlier. It's BS to claim Bernie is so rich. Bernie has outrageous wealth. That's the claim. It's just BS. It's absurd. So why are we seeing it in print? Why? Because at some point, if that's what you do, if all you do is just shovel manure at people, sure, a few may buy it, but you lose really a ton of credibility. These writers aren't going to write stories if they don't think, if they don't sense that a lot of people are going to be interested. Are going to click, are going to want to know what's going on here. And although I may see 3 million, and I clicked on it, so I guess I'm culpable too. I see $3 million. I'm from a upper, there's not even really a middle class anymore. So I guess I'd have to say I'm from a affluent background. $3 million to me doesn't strike me as that much money. It's comfortable. But I recognize that with the Gini coefficient the way it is, there's such, a huge spread at the top with 100 billionaires. 3 million is what a house costs where I live. Not in my neighborhood, but pretty close. You can find $3 million houses. In Washington, D.C., a $3 million house is very nice. It's very attractive, but it's not going to be some incredible mansion. So I see a guy who's worth $3 million who's got a lot of debt, and I'm like, you're saying this guy's outrageously wealthy? Come on. Don't. Who do you think you're talking to? I didn't just fall off the turnip truck, right? That's going to be my response. But let's face it, for so many of us, for so many of our fellow Americans, that's a boatload. That's a crap load of money. And even if it isn't even if it's recognized, well, it's not Hollywood money, it's not Silicon Valley money. Look, most of our fellow Americans have virtually nothing. For them, $3 million, even if they recognize that there are a lot of people with a lot more, it's not. It's all monopoly money to them. It's beyond what they can even imagine. It means something. What it means is it means security. It means the FU money for some horrible boss who's abusive to you or to your spouse. It means that you have you can maybe retire. It means you will be able to retire. It means you don't have to have a, what do we call it again? A retirement plan that's the lottery. Because that's what life is like for half of us, or even more. The median net worth, let me see if I can get that. I know you can see it, but the median net worth of American households is alarming. This is from the Financial Samurai, but they quote the Federal Reserve Consumer Finance Survey 2020. So basically, the median household has $97,300. Now, that means half U.S. households have less. That means that if you own your own home, your equity in that house is less than $100,000. You may owe because I think the average house in America is now costs about $400,000 or $500,000, and in D.C., the latest I said $3 million doesn't buy you. It buys you a nice house. It doesn't buy you what we would have considered or think to be a millionaire's house. The average household now in Washington, D.C., which includes a lot of rough areas with housing that isn't in the greatest condition, $1 million. And D.C. is not the most expensive city. San Francisco, New York, I assume Honolulu are all going to be more. That Boston, maybe, same. So if you are somebody with $100,000, you add up everything, your IRAs, you've worked your butt off, you have 2 jobs, your spouse's IRA, and you add it all up and you take out what you owe, and you got $120,000. And you hear Bernie Sanders has $3 million. Oh my God, he's outrageous. Oh my God, he's 30 times what I have. He's outrageously rich. But what that really is telling you how outrageously poor so many of us are. And how we need a very, very, very different political economy. Bernie represents, in my view, not going far enough, but he is going farther than anybody else. He represents as far to the left as we have when it comes to some kind of economic justice in America today. The Squad, incredibly disappointing. Bernie, too. He's let us down. But he is as far to the left as you're going to get in America today. And as a result, he's got to be demonized. He's got to be, or at least put in a place where people think, oh, he's not really on my side. He's outrageously wealthy, right? I mean, that's what they're trying, and I fear will succeed to a degree at whatever the California Examiner, who even ever heard of them? If you have and you want to share, you can call me right now. I'm live, 240-363-7190. $3 million. It's not outrageous in America today. It's not even close. And when you look at the way Bernie got that money, it was in the least corrupt way a politician can get rich. And yet, when you consider how little so many Americans have at this time, it's not a surprise that this kind of, and I've even talked to conservatives who are like, oh, look at how rich Bernie is. Look at how rich. You try to explain it, and they're, and you could say, well, but your guy McConnell is worth 10 times as much. Your other guy Trump might be worth 1,000 times as much, right? Because claims to be a billionaire. For one thing, if you're an average or you're a median net worth American, that money is so great, it's so vast, it's so beyond your ken that you can't even really you can understand intellectually, but emotionally it's beyond your your ability to grasp. All you know is they all have so much more than I do. All of them do. And the nuances tend to escape us. This is one of the great tragedies of wealth and income inequality at the point we're at. It really is terrible. It's just, and it makes it impossible, really. I think it makes it so hard to effectuate change, which is why I've come around to where I am. And I told David Cobb this yesterday that, hey, I buy it. I buy what you're selling, man. We're not, the Democratic Party cannot be a true change agent. Maybe they'll make a few little trims around the edges, but in the end, they're not. And we'll talk. We're going to get to that, and I'm going to go till about noon today. So if you do call in, maybe someone's on. I don't know because I'm doing things a little differently today. It will change. I promise. I do believe I have someone on the call with me today. No, not yet. Okay, 240 if you can 363-7190. Love to talk to you. The Democratic Party is so, at this point, corrupted by money. I don't see how it can ultimately become the champion of the working people. And and if we can start to elect people who are focused on fighting for working people, they become part of the problem right quick. When we take a step forward with the Democrats, so often we take two steps back with Republicans. Things have gotten steadily worse, not better, for the economy, for the 99%, since at least Ronald Reagan was president, if not before. And you can throw everything at me about how real wealth has increased in America. We all have cell phones. Relatively, working people have fallen farther and farther and farther behind. Okay, really interesting story I want to get to. This was in the New York Times just a couple of days ago. This guest essay, and let's see, do I have the writer on there? I think I do. This was not, and I'm not really surprised. If there was anyone who might have written this in the Times, it would have been Tom Edsall, but he didn't. So the point is really, it's a twofold point, and there's a lot in here. But the main, and I think this headline is very misleading, to be perfectly honest with you. The headline writer probably was not the author. The one thing Trump has that DeSantis never will from yesterday, and what the author's point is, Trump has the support of working class people, populist people. That's the one thing Trump has. He has support of populist Americans. Populist meaning people who work in factories, people who are greeters at Walmart, people who have a very who do not have an easy life. And DeSantis never will have that. But it's interesting because that point comes out in here, and yet the author also says, which I agree with 100%, that Trump isn't on the side of working people any more than DeSantis is. And maybe he slightly is. It does feel, and I talked about this with Arlen, it does feel that to a degree, Trump has tried, some of his policies, especially on trade, but also foreign, have in fact benefited working people. And I think we have to bear that in mind. No matter how much you may hate Donald Trump, you cannot understand Trump if you cannot understand the success of Donald Trump if you attribute it solely to the deplorable nature of his supporters. I don't attribute it to that at all. I attribute it to the fact that he promoted policies and has attacked politicians on both the left and the right, or at least if you want to call the Democrats the left. He's attacked politicians, establishment Democrats and establishment Republicans, as being corrupt, as being on the side of the elites and not on the side of the working class. And there's no doubt that that is accurate. Now, whether Trump is on the side of the people that are supporting him is a question that, while interesting, in the end, I think doesn't get to the real root of the issue, which is who's the worst for working class people. And I think it's clear it's Mitt Romney. I think it's clear it's the white-shoed, it's the W. Bushes. It's the folks who are royalists when it comes to the economy, as well as warmongers, and don't even support any kind of a safety net. So at least Obama, pro-neoliberal policies did come through with Obamacare. Mixed on it, don't love it. He did try to tighten the safety net in certain ways. The worst are the Republican royalists, the McConnells. Trump, if you're a working class, if you're a factory worker, if you are in manufacturing, Trump was in some ways better than Obama. If your kids are stuck overseas in foreign wars, Trump was in some ways better than Obama. So we can't understand Trump if we don't understand that. I believe, and I think that's very, very clear. If you attack him because he's not, and I hate to use the term this way, but if you attack him for not being woke enough, well, guess what? You're helping him. His supporters don't care about woke. They don't want to hear about trans rights. They don't want to hear about affirmative action because those are groups that aren't them. Those are people who aren't them. And that means that they're seeing people getting help when they're not getting it and they need it too. So if you're a quote woke and you want to help the people who vote for Trump, if you want to help the people who look at Bernie Sanders and say, and you want to win, let me say it that way. If you want to win elections, and you want to win over the people who vote for Donald Trump and the people who think $3 million that Bernie Sanders has is outrageous, then you got to be every second of the day fighting for more economic redistribution, economic justice, and not when it comes to identity, not to help out certain traditionally disadvantaged groups and not other traditionally disadvantaged groups, but everybody who isn't doing well right now. That's the only way we're going to win on the left. And so here's from that article, again, what Trump has that DeSantis never will. He's honed an agenda that attacks progressive orthodoxies where they're most likely to affect and annoy conservative elites. This is what the author says. Gay and trans inclusion in suburban schools, black studies in AP classes. And then the author goes on to say, none of these issues have any appreciable impact on the opportunities afforded to working class people. And yet, conservatively treat it as an article of faith that they will motivate the average Republican voters. Okay, first of all, I beg to disagree with that. I think those issues do, to a degree, affect working class voters in the very way that I said. They affect them directly in the sense that they're seeing other groups, yes, maybe traditionally disadvantaged in ways that they haven't been if they're white working class, but they're still if you're a factory worker who's seen their job offshored, or seeing their neighbor's job offshored, and you're constantly being threatened with the loss of yours, you're not worried about other people. You're worried about yourself. And if somebody is coming in and talking about how you're the problem, you're the oppressor, and that's why we need to study black studies in AP classes, and we need to make sure that gay and trans people are included in every class, and will get, scholarships at athletic scholarships that your daughter might not get as a result. You're going to say that does hurt me. That hurts me really badly, and it also hurts me culturally. So I disagree that the agenda that DeSantis has honed does only is likely to affect and annoy conservative elites. Hell, it doesn't affect and annoy particularly conservative elites. Conservative elites don't care about that stuff. You think George W. Bush or Mitt Romney, they don't care about gay and trans inclusion. I mean, nothing to them. They don't care about black studies in AP classes. Their kids are going to private schools. That doesn't annoy them. What annoys them is high taxes. What annoys them is tariffs, because so much of Mitt Romney's billions or hundreds of millions, oh, by the way, he's in the Senate too, so much of his hundreds of millions from private equity came from taking over American manufacturing companies, breaking them up and selling them overseas. So that's the agenda that affects and annoys the conservative elites. The woke, quote, woke agenda is what certainly annoys and to a reasonable degree affects the working class voter. So that's why it works. That's why conservative elites treat as an article effect that these issues will motivate average Republicans, because they do. By the way, the author is Sam Adler Bell. Just looked it up. Want to make sure. This is by Sam Adler Bell. You should read it. He gets some things wrong, but it's still pretty darn interesting. Now, just because those cultural issues motivate working class voters doesn't mean, by the way, that they'll vote for the people who support them, right? It doesn't mean that. But they have to be motivated to vote for somebody for some reason. And if the other party isn't giving them something to chew on, then hell, all right, we'll take the anti-woke people. At least they're not taking the side of people who aren't us and want to give them something that we don't have. Now, what Sam Adler Bell continues to say is the conservative movement has staked its viability on the belief that Americans resent liberal elites because they're woke, not because they wield so much power over other people's lives. Well, it's both, right? I mean, it's both. And they resent all elites, not just liberal elites. They resent all elites. Remember how Obama was able to defeat, one of the great selling points of Obama over Mitt Romney is that Mitt Romney looked like the guy who fired you. Who has more power over your life than your boss, the one who fires you? It's elites who have the power over people's lives, both left and right elites. The problem isn't specifically that there's resentment of liberal elites because they wield power over people's lives. There's resentment because those liberal elites don't seem to give a rat's fat butt about poor, struggling, and working white people. Because they seem not to care about their culture, their issues. Because they continue to support free trade deals that ship those jobs overseas. So this Sam Adler Bell gets this wrong. Conservative elites, according to Bell, promise to want to elect, believe that they can replace progressive elites with someone like Ron DeSantis because they believe that Americans are good with someone ruling over them, uh, and better, and Ron DeSantis is fine. It's just the liberal elites aren't fit to rule. But I reject that. I used to believe I certainly think that conservative elites are hierarchical. There's no question. A William Buckley totally was anti-democratic. He completely believed that only a few special people like him should get to decide what direction our country moved. I saw this on Facebook. I think it was in response, not this, but somewhere, how most most people shouldn't be making decisions. We don't know how to do it. Better to leave it to someone like a Lawrence Summers of Harvard. It's a load of crap. The elites have made a hash of everything. They've screwed everything up, both left and right. The best and the brightest from Harvard in the 60s immersed us, mired us in Vietnam. It was the populist Texan from Texas State Teachers College, LBJ, who, working with Dr. King, brought us civil rights. So the whole idea of elites and certain people fit to rule is complete nonsense, and don't fall for it. When you start attacking Republicans and calling them deplorable, you're falling for it. Don't fall for it. And don't believe that's what working class Americans believe either. It isn't. The problem that they face is they're between a rock and a hard place. Two groups that both are bad for them. But one of them is saying, oh, you're deplorable, and we're going to put trans people and gay people and people of color over you. Whereas Republicans are saying to them, hey, you're better than those people. So, of course, they're going to choose the less bad alternative. And here's where the author gets it. Here's where he finally gets it, I think. Although not 100%, Sam Adler-Bell, New York Times. And this was yesterday, I believe. Trump, despite what he sometimes represents, is no more likely than DeSantis to disrupt the American oligarchy. As president, he largely let the plutocrats in his cabinet run the country. Largely. But Trump did do some things that the American oligarchy didn't like. He did pull us out of Afghanistan. He did try to make peace with Russia. He did raise tariffs. None of that the American oligarchy likes. Heck, I don't think they even liked him trying to repeal Obamacare at this point. There's so much of that tax money that we contribute to government is actually going to the pockets of Wall Street corporations and top management of those companies, of the for-profit healthcare industry. So I don't even think they particularly like that. And don't forget, John McCain, one of the richest senators at the time, was the one who voted against it. Now, that said, I'm mixed on Obamacare, but in the end, I think it was the right, better than not having it. Let's put it that way. But here's where Sam Adler gets it right. Few politicians on either side appear eager. Hell, they're not willing. It's not even eager. They're not willing to give every American the means and not merely the right to rule ourselves. Of course, that's the bottom line. Since neither party is willing to provide Americans with the means, with maybe a few exceptions like Bernie, who's not even a Democrat. Since neither party is willing to afford Americans the means to rule ourselves, and I think that's bull. Just because you're poor doesn't mean you can't rule yourselves. We can rule ourselves, but we're not given the means, we're not afforded the means, most of us, to live a decent, full life without an incredible amount of stress and anxiety. That's why Republicans go after the wokeness, because they got to give their people something, and that's what they can give them. All right, before we go, I do want to show you one more. I saw this video yesterday, and I thought this was so interesting. Many of you know I am a fan, quite a fan, I would say, of Brianna Joy Gray. And she does a video cast like I do. She does several. And she was interviewing, and by the way, we had a trans woman on this call show it was a week two ago. BA, I love BA. BA is great. I heard from a man who works with BA yesterday, and I was really happy to talk to him, to Michael. Um, I I hate to preface it this way because, but times being what they are, you do have to tread lightly when talking about people in certain groups. And certainly, trans people have been discriminated against and persecuted and are still being persecuted terribly. So I am going to tread lightly. But when I watched this video with Brianna Joy Gray, who tried so hard to build some kind of a rapport with her guest, that where the guest could acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, a position that the trans movement in general does not, that opposes, which is that there should be bio women only spaces. That position you cannot voice without getting shut down by trans activists. In other words, the trans movement is unwilling to concede any ground to feminist activists, to female women activists who say, "Hey, we support trans rights, but biological women, biological females, biological girls should have at least some spaces, maybe just athletics." I would go further than that. I would say, shelters. Not that we don't have an obligation to keep everybody safe. I do think that there are some places that should be reserved for bio women. And that position you cannot voice um, without immediate pushback from trans activists. That to me makes it harder for us to move to an economically just society, because you're pitting bio women, trans women against each other. You're saying again to working class voters, and by the way, in this case, it has nothing to do with race, with color, or with nation of origin. You're saying to working class voters who are struggling, your daughters will have to compete, including in athletics, with biological males or trans women who have, without question, undoubtedly, advantages, physiological advantages. And that is simply not going to fly in much of our country. We have got to move. We've got to figure out on the left how we can acknowledge when we do have advantages, when we do have privileges, not pretend they don't exist. And I'll make it very personal. As a Jewish American, we are incredibly privileged as a group. Sure, there are poor Jews, no question about it. But there are fewer poor Jews proportionally than just about members of any other group. And there are more wealthy Jews proportionally than members of just about any other group. And so instead of constantly whining about, and I do think it's whining on many occasions, anti-Semitism and pointing the finger and calling people racist or calling people Jew haters, there certainly are places for that. Don't assume it. Don't gin up the outrage factor. Don't start talking. Anytime someone says George Soros, say, oh, they're a Jew hater. There are many possibilities. Don't make assumptions. Don't assume the worst about people. Recognize our privilege. And you know what? If you're a trans woman, recognize that you do have a biological advantage over women, bio women. If you really want understanding, if you want people to be on your side, who may not be. All right, let's listen to this. I want to play this because to me this really is kind of instructive, and I'll stop it at certain places maybe. I know I'm going a little long, but why the heck not?
Mm-hmm. So, I think that if you're asking me what I think the solution should be, I truly do think that good faith identification should be enough for transgender people to compete in sports. Good faith identification. And if somebody is in bad faith trying to compete, then you handle it. But as of right now,
Well, who
looking at
adjudicates that, Aaron?
so obviously if you see somebody who is very clearly doing some sort of fraudulent attempt at sports, I think that there are avenues that you can take to adjudicate that. You can Anybody is free to go to court and sue for fraud or something like that if there's a clear case. But the thing is that we're not seeing that. Like this is
All right, so I'm going to just stop it right there. So the debate is in what circumstances or situations should a trans woman be allowed to compete in sports activities with biological women or cis women. And and I don't like the term cis women, but what the term cis woman means is someone who identifies as their gender or identifies by gender as the sex of their birth, of their assigned birth. But I don't buy that is a good. It's appropriate in this context because I believe that if you're a biological woman, you are or a female assigned female at birth, but you identify as a man, but you haven't had any kind of transition, then you should be allowed to compete with women. I don't see any disadvantage to anybody in that situation. You're born with the, what is it, double Y, right? Women are two Ys. Or are they two X's? I don't know. Women, I believe, are two. You're born with the two chromosomes to make you a woman, even or girl. Even if um, you feel inside, you know you're a man. It doesn't matter. Right? XX is male. XY is female. Got it totally wrong. So you're XY, but you identify as a male. So what? You should still be able to compete with women. You don't have an unfair advantage. That makes you a bio woman, not a cis woman. I don't think the right term in this case is cis. The right term is bio. There should be places where only bio women compete. And that sports is one of them, in my opinion, because men are built differently. In general, of course, there's some. Look, there was an argument a while ago whether Serena Williams should be considered the greatest woman, the greatest tennis player of all time, and John McEnroe got beat over the head. Oh, of course, she's the greatest of all time, not just the greatest woman. And, he even apologized. She lost in two sets, straight sets, 6-love, 6-1, to a man ranked, I think, around 200th in the world. She said she couldn't win unless she was playing someone below the top 500. This is probably the greatest woman tennis player in the world. So maybe the greatest woman athlete in the world. The best tennis player, maybe not now, but 10 years ago, 5 years ago. So clearly there are advantages that men in general have in sports over women in terms of strength, in terms of speed, in terms of explosiveness. And to pretend that isn't true is absurd. And you lose the argument. So Brianna's guest is saying is, well, if you are acting in good faith, which Brianna Joy Gray says, well, who decides? Who decides? She says, well, you can file a lawsuit. Really? We're going to say that if you lose your place on a sports team to a trans person, you got to sue them in court and maybe win? I mean, that's just ridiculous. I hope people see that. This is, again, why we lose taking positions like this. And I so admire Brianna Joy Gray for having this conversation. This is a tough conversation. In the end, I think she let the guest skate a little bit.
This is the reason I'm saying this, is that we are not actually seeing that happen. I can't think of a single case where a cisgender man has attempted to identify as a woman to win in sports or something like that. It
I
hasn't
mean,
happened.
I'm not here to weigh in on what is good faith or
Mhm.
what is bad, but certainly people are making the accusation that folks like Leah Thomas,
I know Leah
uh,
Thomas personally, and
yeah,
she is a wonderful woman, and if you ever get to know her, she is one of the sweetest souls that you will ever meet.
All right, now see, that's such a bad response. What does that mean? That means nothing. So you personally are friends with her? So what? What does that do for the person, the girl, the woman who's placed Leah Thomas, a trans woman who, until she was about 20, identified as a man and competed as a man in swimming in Division One sports? What relevance does that have? And also, I would say that is not consistent with other reports about Leah Thomas, who has, I believe, in interview after interview, refused to show any empathy or concern for the women against whom she's competing. So again, we have to be realistic. We have to recognize that these cultural issues divide us, and there aren't always easy answers. If you want, and Brianna Joy Gray makes this point, and I think she makes it very, very well. I'm going to leave this video and we're going to go. But she makes the point earlier in that video that a lot of people may be arguing against trans women competing against women in collegiate sports. They may be making that argument in bad faith. They may be making it because they're transphobes. So my answer is, so what? If that's the case, the best way you can defang them is say, yeah, you got a point there. Yeah, that's true. Trans women should not probably compete. That's something we can agree on. This is an area that should be reserved for biological women. Let's talk about trans health. Let's talk about how we can make things better for the trans kids who commit suicide. How can we address that issue? How can we address the homeless problem that is particularly serious among trans youth? What are the solutions to that? Because we agree. Let's come to some kind of common sense decision about how to reserve for women a place where they can compete on a relatively even playing field, recognizing that we all have different strengths and weaknesses. Let's do that. And at the same time, or since we've already agreed to that, let's address the problems that really, really matter. Getting a good education, everyone. Having a safe, secure place to live, everyone. As long as we get bogged down in these absurd cultural divides, the right wins, the elites win, the corporatists win, the fascists win. I'll be back tomorrow. Thanks so much for watching and being part of the Halitics family.